It is March 17th, 2022, and you're watching The Code Report. It's about time we had a talk about time. You would think it's a pretty simple concept. Time began on January 1st, 1970 with the Unix epoch. At any moment, we can get the number of milliseconds elapsed from this date on any computer using a method like date now. This is called incremental time, but one problem is that the Earth doesn't rotate evenly because it's actually flat, and the International Earth Rotation Service occasionally mandates a leap second, where an additional second is added to the last minute of the day. Things start getting weird when we talk about time zones, which are calculated relative to Greenwich Mean Time. On the Pacific, we subtract 8 hours, but in Newfoundland, they only subtract 3.5 hours, and in Nepal, they add 5 3/4. Then daylight savings comes around, and all the time zones change, except in places like Arizona and Hawaii that don't do a time change. In the South Pacific, they're 13 hours ahead, which requires them to skip an entire day. You could celebrate New Year's on Christmas Island, spend the entire next day recovering from your hangover, then fly to Jarvis Island in time to celebrate New Year's Eve again. Now, when it comes to the entire year, the Gregorian calendar is a ridiculous abstraction. Some months have 28 days, while others have 31. But every other counting system we use, like weeks and days, have consistent intervals. It doesn't have to be this way. The Cotsworth Plan, which was presented in 1902, divides the year into 13 months, each month with 4 weeks or 28 days, with one rest day somewhere in the middle. It makes so much more sense and aligns better with the lunar cycle. For developers, it would make the complicated matter of finding the duration of multiple months a simple matter of multiplying by 28. But there may be some good news when it comes to keeping track of time. There's a bill going through Congress right now to get rid of daylight savings. Honestly, it doesn't go far enough, and I wish they would also get rid of the Gregorian calendar. This could be bad news though for low-level systems programmers who figured out all these weird rules with time zones. I imagine this is the type of code that nobody wants to touch, but if we get rid of daylight savings, somebody will have to go in there and change things. Speaking of changes, there is a stage 3 proposal for the Temporal API in JavaScript, which would make it much easier to work with dates and times. The current date implementation in JavaScript goes all the way back to 1995 when Brendan Eich had 10 days to write the language. The overlords at Netscape wanted it to be kind of like Java, so he copied the Java implementation, which for lack of a better word was a total piece of Even Java overhauled that API back in '97, but in JavaScript, we still have the pleasure of using it. And not surprisingly, recent polling data indicates that it's one of the most hated features in JavaScript. There are libraries like Moment.js and date functions that improve many of its shortcomings, but it would be nice to have something better built in. When getting the current time in JavaScript, it only gives you the milliseconds. However, the new API would also give you microseconds, nanoseconds, and other formats that you might find useful. An even bigger problem, though, is that it's difficult to compute times for a specific time zone. But the Temporal API would fix that by providing a time zone aware object. It would also make it much easier to compute values between dates and simplifies the process of working with dates in a variety of different ways. Looks awesome, but I'm afraid we've run out of time for our session today. This has been the Code Report. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.